welcome back to another video, and today we're going back to look into more of another prediction video for Endwalker. And I'm sure that you can guess from the title, today we're going to be looking at our favorite intergalactic death machine, Omega. Omega is a classic monster that we've seen from most of the other Final Fantasy games, and it's quite recognizable these days with its roundish body, giant eye, and spider legs. Probably one of the most famous monsters in the entire series. In fact, with the revelation that we learned about Omega during the Raid series, it is even theorized that it may actually be the same Omega, just traveling across worlds or stars or even different dimensions, and that Omega is just one and the same. That hasn't been confirmed or denied yet, so I'm going to hold off judgment on that. Before we begin with the rest of the video though, just want to let you know that there will be major spoilers here, especially for the Omega Raid series, so just a warning there. So, we first learn of Omega way back in A Realm Reborn when the Warrior of Light and Alphinaud are sitting with Raubon and Nanamo and talking about the recent uprisings in Udal. They found out that a member of the Syndicate, Teleji Adeleji, was instigating these attacks, all just so he could get more support for his Carteneau reclamation bill. Or rather, what that is opening up the fields of Carteneau for refugees. This was just a ruse, however, so that he would be able to search through the Allegan ruins that were discovered at Carteneau for a chance to find out if Omega was there. This plan ultimately falls apart, and we don't hear anything else about Omega for a long time afterwards. It's not until over an expansion later, during 3.5, when Omega was even mentioned again. With the threat of a powerful primal that rivaled even Bahamut, the Alliance was at a loss of how to deal with it. Though the primal was imprisoned inside of a spell of sealing, it was clear that this was only a temporary solution, and it was only going to be a matter of time before the primal broke free. With Nero's suggestion, the Alliance felt that they had no other choice but to go with the plan to awaken Omega and deal with the primal. And not a moment too soon, because no sooner did Omega awaken than the primal break free. In this case, it took on the form of a giant dragon, Shinryu, who was also, coincidentally, a legendary enemy of Omega throughout the entire series. After a fierce airborne battle, Omega was successful in sealing Shinryu away. However, our death machine ended up escaping at the same time. It's during Stormblood that we came across it again and discovered that while a machine, it's also intelligent and has some pretty crazy powerful abilities, such as being able to create life out of nothing. How that works is we're not entirely sure yet, but during the Raid series we find out more about Omega, how it originally came from another planet thousands of years ago. So up until this point, everyone assumed that Omega was just another creation that was left behind by Alec. That was not the case at all. The truth was, Omega originally hails from the same world as Midgardsormr, the place known as the Dragon Star. We don't know much else about this world, only that there seemed to have been, at some point, some kind of war that went on between Midgardsormr and the people who lived there. And so in the end, rather than live in fear and risk his children being killed, Midgardsormr chose to leave his world behind and carry his 7 eggs across the stars in search of a new world to raise his young in peace. Omega was given the order to follow, and so it began their intergalactic chase as Omega relentlessly followed after Midgardsormr. Omega's entire purpose, you see, is to find stronger opponents, defeat them, and evolve. And at the time, Midgardsormr was the most powerful creature on his home planet, hence why it gave chase across the galaxy. Now at some point, it seemed that Omega ended up losing track of Midgardsormr. The reason that I say that is because Midgardsormr arrived probably somewhere near the very beginning, like probably right after the Sundering. So if I had to guess, I would say at least 10,000 years. That's when he arrived, and that's when he was able to raise his children and everything that happened from that point on. However, Omega was still able to track Midgardsormr across the stars. However, it didn't seem that he arrived until much later, probably around at least 5,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. However, by the time that Omega did finally arrive on Hydaelyn, it seems that its journey had done a lot of damage to it, and so it needed time to recover and repair itself. That was when the Allegans discovered it and were able to capture it while it was still weakened. Now, it should be mentioned that while Omega does have great intelligence, it doesn't quite understand feelings or the hearts, or it just doesn't have empathy for other beings. As such, it has no problems about killing off innocent people and perhaps even just going straight into genocide if it has to and then moving on to the next world. But because of all the damage that it had suffered while it was making its journey, it seems that it decided to play nice with Alec for the time being, and it was even suggested that it was Omega that was used to bring down Bahamut in the first place. So that hasn't been confirmed yet, but it seems reasonable to assume that with Zonde's obsession with power, especially after he discovered and captured Omega, he seemed to have found his stride, that it was destiny that he maybe take over Mericidia, so he was able to march in, use Omega to bring down Bahamut, and maybe even enslave a lot of the dragons when they invaded Mericidia. Again, none of that is 100% confirmed yet, but it does seem reasonable to assume it. Well, just before Alec was brought low by their own hand, Omega seems to have been sealed up inside what would become the ruins in Cardeneau, which leads us to a few thousand years into the future where we confront our delightful little death machine. Now, again, we don't really find out more about Omega until the Raid series from Stormblood. That's when Omega is fully awake now, and it is able to follow through on its original programming, which again is to grow and evolve by facing strong foes. Ultimately, it sees the Warrior of Light and others similar to them as a way to do so, and basically forces them to compete in its games. It creates an interdimensional rift where there houses several different worlds that it created, which it can test and pit foes against each other. Apparently, its logic is that if it can no longer fight the strongest foe in the world, it would have to make its own. So it creates these worlds within the rift where it does just that. At one point, when it creates Alpha, it's a little chocobo creature, and sends it out into the real world to bring someone like the Warrior of Light into the rift where Omega can use it to begin its testing. Now, Omega is not playing around here. It made a very clear threat to them. It wants the Warrior of Light to participate in all these battles, including foes that are either historical or maybe even fictional. It doesn't matter. Omega just wants to learn and grow, and the Warrior of Light is a perfect test subject to it. And Omega gave them a very deadly threat that if they don't compete in its experiments, then it will unleash a horde of monsters onto the cities of Eorzea, which it can very well do. So, unable to say no, the Warrior of Light and the others dive into the rift and battle against these trials as Omega tries to replicate the hero so that it can grow strong enough to be able to return to its home star. The official lore book states that Omega does all this because it seeks to recreate itself in the image of man, for it wants to understand what motivates something so powerful. But though it seems that they are able to take on a human-like version of itself, the Warrior of Light is able to defeat them as well. Omega's story concludes in Stormblood in that Omega dies. Well, as much as a machine can die, I suppose. But once it is officially destroyed, I suppose you could say, then with it goes the interdimensional rift, as well as the threat of unleashing monsters onto the world. Though it is suggested that maybe not all of Omega is gone at this point. So it was an amazing story, I really loved it, but what does this have to do with Endwalker? Well, simply put, is that it's because of the benchmark. Here is the benchmark trailer for Endwalker, and we see something that looks very similar to Omega. Though it is different, it's clearly Omega inspired. Soon after the benchmark was released, Yoshi P made a suggestion during an interview that players may wish to complete the trials of the Binding Coils of Bahamut, Alexander, and Omega before diving right into Endwalker. It could be that Yoshi P is just pulling our leg again, and that he just thinks we should have our fill of deep lore before playing the ending of this current story, but it would not surprise me if it turns out that Omega also pays some kind of a visit, which again, it is certainly possible. We've had stranger things happen. I mean, at first I thought that maybe it was a recreation of Omega, only had the Garleans built it? But then I remembered that there's no way they could have built it because they never got a chance to encounter Omega. At least until I remembered that the Ascians, such as Fandaniel and especially Emix were probably there when Omega first appeared 5,000 years ago, like right before Alec was destroyed and everything. They could have passed that information to Galamal. It certainly would not have been impossible. There is also the fact that the captured Shinryu had fallen into their hands for a brief time, and they could have had maybe just the tiniest glimpse of the technology used to create it. Now, while I don't think that Omega will be playing a huge role in the upcoming expansion, it may make some kind of an appearance. Maybe not in the way that we first thought, though. Being the conclusion to the story of Zodiark and Heidelin's story, it could be that we need to learn more about the history of Garlemald before we end up going there, and especially since they have stolen most of their technology from Alog, there could be mention of Omega in those pages somewhere. It is also possible that they put their own twist on their own version of Omega. The thing we need to remember though is that Omega is a weapon, and so it is possible that it could be rebuilt. Especially after learning from the Tales from the Shadows, we discover that Omega is maybe more complicated than a few strands of code. Also, while it does look like some form of Omega appears in the benchmark, we've seen several benchmarks in the past, and we know that some of the monsters from there can be showing up, but they're usually like side battles or even fates. As much as I would love to see Omega appearing again, no matter what form it takes, it's still kind of a struggle for me to see how else it could be part of the storyline that would make sense. Then again, that interview recommendation from Yoshida gives me hope for something more, especially since this machine, while similar, is not the same model that we know. Could it be that Garlemald just decided to build their own death machine, or maybe some pieces were left behind when Omega fled or was destroyed, and then maybe pieces just found their way back to Garlemald somehow? Maybe we have like a spy inside the Ironworks who passed on this information to them, or maybe it could be just some bonus fate. That I'm not entirely sure. My best guess for Omega is that since we are going to be learning a lot more about the past, that's my best bet, we're going to have to come across some kind of information about Alog as well as Omega. It could be that maybe some kind of blueprints or something similar, like maybe schematics have been saved somewhere within the Allagan ruins and Garlemald knows how to find those. And maybe either they found some kind of recordings from Omega, maybe the schematics of technology that they designed off that machine, and maybe they actually used parts of what they found there to help build up what we have with the tower. Either way, I do think that this boss is going to be causing us some kind of trouble once we get to Garlemald. Omega's story, like most of the storylines that we have in this game, can be a bit complicated if you don't pay attention, and Omega is definitely one of those. It has to be one of the longest threads and storylines in the entire game, having crossed over several expansions, and we may be seeing it at least one more time before the ending finally arrives. Anyway, everyone, I think that's going to be all I have to say for the idea of Omega, and while I do love Omega, I have mixed feelings about how it could be showing up again. But hey, if anyone can pull it off, it's the dev team, so I can't wait to see what they have planned. In the meantime, we're just 4 weeks away from the early release, so we still have a couple more prediction videos coming our way until then. For my next prediction, it's going to be all about the new high-end 8-player raid series, Pandemonium. Just my ideas to what could be waiting for us and just how La Habrea could be involved in it. Anyway, I hope you're all looking forward to it, and this is Fantasy Girl signing out.